Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Dr. Jamie Mathias, Executive Director of MASBA, the Mexican American School Boards Association, and we are excited to be hosting this webinar today on the impact of proposed charter school legislation on our publicly run public schools here in Texas. A quick note on continuing education credits. Carlos on our team here at MASBA will be issuing CEC certificates this afternoon and tomorrow and on Wednesday. We know that trustees need that information before May elections, so we're working to turn around the CECs for the first 10 weeks of this webinar series during the next few days. Also, 3 quick announcements. Our conference proceedings are now available online. You can get them through Amazon. You can find that link at masbatx.org/books. We're really excited by that 280-page work that contains the proceedings of our MASBA conference in 2020. Also, pre-registration is open for our 2021 conference, which will be held on September the 9th through the 12th in San Antonio. Join us at the Wyndham San Antonio Riverwalk on September 9 through 12. You can pre-register now for only $200 through April the 30th at masbatx.org/conference. And finally, we have only 3 days left for graduating seniors to apply for our MASBA scholarships. Last year, we awarded 285 scholarships to graduating seniors throughout Texas. We're excited by that program. Please join us in spreading word. They can apply for our scholarships. It's a simple online application that's available at masbatx.org/scholarships. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce one of the sponsors of this conversation series. Our friends from Aetna have been tremendous supports to our public schools, not only supporting MASBA, but also helping to get us through this pandemic. We have with us John today on behalf of Aetna. John, welcome. Thank you to you and all our friends at Aetna.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you great. Tell us all about Aetna, John.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. We so sincerely appreciate being able to be a sponsor today and for you allowing us to attend and say a few words. So in the spirit of school board meetings, I'll keep it under 3 minutes and won't expect any feedback backwards. But you're right about the pandemic. We certainly know that for our superintendents and trustees that are on the phone, time's extremely valuable. We also know that, you know, as elected, you guys have some of the guys and gals have some of the longest hours, receive very little recognition. So I do want to pause here and just say thank you for all that you do for our communities. You arguably hold the most important elected position in local government because your investments in our children help transform the future of our communities. And like you, Aetna and CVS are equally invested in transformation as we work to change healthcare for the better by making it more simple, more accessible, and more affordable through our innovation, our connectivity, and our unrivaled local footprint. You know, our real goal is to make healthcare local again with resources in our communities, such as our CVS EMOS stores and our CVS Health Hubs. So the future of our mission is one where families in our communities have better overall health and more money in their pockets. I would say it's no secret that the complexities of healthcare have become even more difficult to navigate due to COVID-19. Each of you know that far too well, as you've had long extended hours, kind of working in an ever-changing environment to make decisions for your staff and your students. If you think about even today as we sit, you know, it's the kickoff as most of us sit in Texas for vaccine eligibility for anybody 16 and older. So I'm especially excited to use my time here to encourage all of you to attend a special education session that Aetna will be conducting with our MASBA friends on April 8th regarding access to vaccines, vaccine hesitancy, specifically within our Latinx communities, and then what is CVS's role in the national vaccine distribution. So don't want to use this time as a big Aetna infomercial, really want to just use it as an education for, we'd love all of you to attend. The information, the invite is forthcoming. You'll receive more information on that for April 8th. We'd love for all of you to be there. And thank you again, Jamie, all of MASBA, and all of our attendees for allowing Aetna to participate. Looking forward to hearing the discussion.
Tremendous. Thank you, John. Please share our gratitude with all our friends at Aetna. We really, really appreciate you all. I know that certainly during my 8 years of serving here on the Austin ISD Board of Trustees, y'all did tremendous, tremendous work for the Austin ISD, saving us millions upon millions of dollars on our health care plan. So I can't brag on y'all enough. We love you and all our friends at Aetna.
Thank you so much.
John, as you go into the background, we'll look forward to seeing you at the end of the webinar, but we'll also look forward to welcoming the friends for our conversation here today on the impact of charter schools on our publicly run public schools here in Texas. As we invite them to turn on their cameras, our conversation today focuses on the impact of charter schools, particularly on students of color. And in the interest of transparency, I am not the world's biggest fan of charter schools. In fact, in 2012, I ran for the school board here in Austin on a platform of reversing the privatization of Austin's public schools, which we did later that year, a feat that's featured in the documentary Killing Ed, which tells of how the money of Texas taxpayers were funneled through one charter school system at that time to fund a military coup in Turkey. Of fascinating work. I invite you to check that out. Again, that documentary is Killing Ed. Today we have some powerful, powerful panelists, and what I'd like to do is to invite them to introduce themselves to us. Panelists, tell us who you are, what you love most about our Texas public schools, and why you said, I absolutely have to be part of this when you heard that this webinar was going to be about proposed charter school legislation. How's that for a deal? Shall we go in alphabetical order? Let's start with Patty. Patty, tell us who you are, what you love about our Texas public schools, and why you absolutely had to be here today.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I, of course, know Jamie well because I work out of Boston. So my son was at AISD for a long time. So I love the most my son's kindergarten teacher, which was long, long ago, and also his elementary school. But in terms of public education, I do consulting work, and I work only on charter school issues. I work with education organizations and districts, as well as parent groups, to really focus on increasing the transparency and accountability of charter schools. And the public schools serving all children, not discriminating against children who have any kind of discipline history, providing special education services. That democratic control with elected school board members is what is essential, what we have to preserve in public schools.
Tremendous. Thank you, Patty. Thomas, welcome. Glad to have you here. We so greatly appreciate your service, your former service on the State Board of Education. Tell us about yourself, what you love about our public schools, and why you absolutely had to be here today as well.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a recovering SBOE member, served for 6 years. And in full disclosure, my father is the one that wrote the law creating charter schools in 1995 under Governor Bush. And I've spent the better part of the last decade and a half trying to unwind it. But, you know, that's the way things go. But I am a product of public schools. My wife and both of my children are as well. My wife taught 6 years as a high school Spanish teacher. Teaching not just the language, but the culture and everything about our Mexican American heritage and brethren in our school districts and in our state. And candidly, I've just always been a big public education advocate. And when I heard you wanted to talk about charters and what's going on this session, I thought I would jump in with both feet. So happy to be part of the discussion.
Tremendous. Glad to have you here, Thomas, as another recovering education leader in our state. Glad to have you. Emily, welcome. Tell us who you are, what you love about our public schools, and why this issue is so important to you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I am Emily Sawyer. I am a parent of 5 boys that all attend Austin ISD schools. And what I love most about our Texas public schools are the teachers. I think the teachers and the staff in the schools really make the places. And so that's my favorite thing about our schools, and it's a great reason to do everything I can to support them. And why I had to be here when I heard about this is the sort of crossroads between discipline practices and charter schools, and the way that's coming together in the legislature this year is really an important spot for me to do some work in. And so I was really grateful to be invited to this conversation. Thanks.
Tremendous. Glad to have you with us, Emily. And finally, Vincent. I can't brag enough on Vincent, our Associate Executive Director here at MASBA. It was Vincent who led efforts in 2012 to help us reverse the privatization of public ed here in Austin. Vincent, tell us about yourself, what you love about our public schools, and why you're so passionate about this topic as well.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Mathias, and it's great to be on the panel. And I do have kids at AISD Public Schools, and the charter operator that, with your help, we ousted in 2012 was planning on taking those schools over, as well as 8 other schools in AISD. So we were fortunate enough to organize and kick them out. And I love public schools because they serve our most marginalized. They're not, to a great extent, trying to filter out families. They don't want to filter out families. They want to serve our highest needs in the way that we say, the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island says, come over, we love you, we want to help you. We're trying to say that too in our public schools. We're here for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Vincent, for that. Panelists, we're so glad to have you here. As we all know, MASBA is laser focused on issues of racism and equity. So before we get too deeply into the impact of proposed charter school legislation on our Texas public schools, I'd like to invite each of you to share with us an overview of your perspective on charter schools, particularly with respect to issues of race and equity. That is, the NAACP shared a strong statement in 2017 on the impact of charters on communities of color. In your estimation, in what ways are charter schools helping or hindering issues of race and equity in public education? Who'd like to jump in?
Well, I'm never bashful. I've got a mouth and I'm not afraid to use it. Candidly, some of the demographics on charters, looks like they're more appealing to minority populations. I think those are deceiving. I think the thing that we've got to keep in mind with charters primarily is they appeal to kids who have parents who are engaged and who have the tools to be engaged or the abilities to stay engaged, whether it's a lack of language barrier or economic barriers or other things that keep those kids from truly having a choice. And I think the charters try to play this game, showing that they're more inclusive than they are. But I would say that their track record on socioeconomics is better than their track record with special needs kids or CTE kids. If you look at the demographics of charters, they are very monolithic. They don't have a lot of diversity, which is not good for any child. Diversity helps us all become a stronger student body, a stronger state. So I don't think that they have a good story to tell. And I think they're cherry pickers and copycats by and large.
I would just build on what Thomas said, and I think it's important. Not every, I talk to charter teachers and I talk to charter parents, and not every charter teacher, there are many very dedicated teachers. What I think is really important to emphasize is that the charter system works against serving all students. It is set up that way, it is intentional, and it cherry picks out students. Charters do serve a high percentage of kids of color. That's because they, to date, although we're moving into suburban areas, have located in communities, in neighborhoods, where they're primarily children of color. And that is, I call it sort of geographic determinism. So they serve low-income kids, kids of color. Where you see the difference is what I call below the fold, where they are not serving all children and they are not serving the most challenged children. You see, when you compare charters statewide, you see one picture. When you compare their demographics to the district, you see another picture. But the really important picture is to look at what charters serve compared to nearby neighborhood schools. And we see demographics almost in every case where, for example, charters serve only a third of the students with special needs. I look at a lot of those comparisons and it's very stunning. At-risk, children with special needs, discipline placements, that's where you begin to see that there is not equity in charter schools. And it's the system that works against us with the discipline exclusion, not providing transportation, charters can get transportation money, just the way districts do, but they don't. Those are the ways that they exclude students, and we also know that they particularly counsel out children with special needs.
I guess I would just add, overall, I think that creating a system of competition and so-called choice, when what we're really striving to do is serve all students, actually, as Patty said, sets up a system where we aren't prepared to serve all students well. And when you have a system of so-called choice, it really requires, in a way, that there's be winners and losers. And we want public education to be a system where everyone wins. So that's all I would add to that.
Thank you, Emily. We want to pause and to invite all of those who are with us today to be able to respond with questions and comments. We love when our audience is engaged. We're getting a comment from Stephanie saying many charters serve dropouts ages 16 to 24 and trauma exposed. She says, sorry, I can't clump charter schools together, but we've weighted this program against charters. We're not treating it equitably. Any comments before we move on?
Sure. I publicly and privately, I will tell you that some charter schools save kids' lives. No doubt about it. There are non-traditional charter offerings that she's mentioned exactly. You know, dropout recovery, young mothers that can't do a traditional school day. And so I do think there has been some innovation brought about by charters. I wish it was more of it, because I think there are more kids that could use a more non-traditional model. And I think, candidly, if nothing else, COVID has taught ISDs and charters there are different ways to do this. I think, you know, sometimes you really have to be shaken out of your mold to look at things differently. And it'll be interesting to see what these practices will be maintained after the COVID has become more manageable and we return to what is called a new normal. But I don't have any doubt that some charters really do a fantastic job reaching the non-traditional child in a non-traditional way. But the lion's share of them are simply locating across the street and trying to skim the cream off the top and take the ones that are easier to educate. It's just, the numbers just don't lie.
Well, and originally in Killing Ed, sorry, Patty, in Killing Ed, the documentary, you can see it also shows kind of the beginnings of charter schools, and Diane Ravitch walks you through how it was first founded or started. The initiative was to create a model, right? To create a model that public schools could possibly replicate. But what we've seen is that has turned into almost franchising chains, and not at the detriment of public schools. And so, yeah, there's Learn for Life, there's Goodwill, Excel, you know, that helps people, you know, folks from age 19 to 60 get their GED and diploma. The thing is that we can do that in our public schools. We can do that. We don't need to create a whole other system of schools to do that, because that's how capitalism operates, you know, and you see how what that ends up looking like is the money involved becomes, how does healthcare, you know, make money off of a public, or how does Cigna or you know, health insurance make money off of healthcare? How do military contractors make money off of defense contracts? How do testing businesses and charter schools make money off of a public infrastructure, which is public education? And that's what it's lent towards. So this isn't to disrespect the great work that people are doing to try to help kids and families and people get their education. It's how the system is hurting true public schools.
I'd like to add one thing to that. And I think it's always important with charter schools to look, as I call it, below the fold. So I look at things like what charters are spending on instruction versus central administration, just for example. And in many cases, the charter schools that serve, for example, Premier High Schools is one, who serve a targeted audience of students who tend to be older and it's an alternative accountability school. They spend incredibly less on instruction. I don't have the number for Premier right in front of me, but it's somewhere around $800 less on instruction. So you have to look at what they're doing, and you have to look at the services they provide. So many of them, even for schools that really need more support services for students, you can see that on TAPER and TEA reports. So you don't see the level of social workers and counselors, for example, that are needed for that student population. And so you look at what they spend on instruction, central administration, what they're spending on support services, and you begin to really see that gap. So the question is, there are some, but are they really meeting the needs of those students? And are those students' needs met in public schools as well?
Thank you, Patty. We want to give a shout out to Trustee Lee Crenshaw of West ISD. She says, there is always something to learn from every situation. I'm opposed to charters for a variety of reasons, but they are doing a few things correctly, so we need to make sure we can fill the gaps when we no longer have charters. Let's go to the next question. Since this is on the impact of proposed legislation on our publicly run public schools here in Texas, the Texas Legislative Education Equity Caucus has assisted us in compiling a list of proposed bills concerning charter schools, which we included in the handouts tab of this webinar. I'm wondering, panelists, as you survey proposed legislation concerning charter schools, what strikes you?
Well, to quote the book of Ecclesiastes, as well as the group The Birds, to everything there is a season. And last session was a very pro public education session with House Bill 3 and with school finance, some long needed reforms, as well as some other, innovative reforms that have happened over the past. House Bill 5 by Jimmy Don Aycock was a watershed moment in the history of public education. But we are in a different season, and it was a significant change when Harold Dutton was appointed to be chair of the House Public Education Committee. He is very pro-charter. Not a criticism, it's just an observation. It's just that's how he is wired, and he's from the Houston area. So from an ISD perspective, we are hoping to just hold what we've got. We are not looking to make any strides this session, and the vast majority of bills that you see moving are much more supportive of charters. And the irony is, and this is the part that really is the biggest burr under my saddle blanket, is you see bills that want to restrict what ISDs can do, but free up what charters can do. And so ultimately, I think there's a threshold question for members of the legislature is, if regulations are bad for kids, then free us up and level the playing field and let us go do the best we can do for kids. But there is not a single ISD in the state of Texas that would do things the same tomorrow if they were given freedom from regulations today. So if the innovative, nimble, lack of red tape model is good because there's a lot of supporters for charters in the legislature, then allow us the same flexibility to be innovative and creative and trust locally elected officials to do that. So you really have an exceedingly high amount of hypocrisy on legislative policy in the legislature. They don't understand. They keep on to put sand in our saddlebags, and free up our competition to run free. So I don't care which way they go, but treat us all similarly, because to call the charter movement a laboratory or an experiment at this point is a joke. It's been around. Dad wrote the law in 1995. We're beyond the experimental phase. We're beyond the beta test. This is a full-blown program. So let's figure out, what do education regulations need to look like for public education? Apply it to everybody, and let's compete for kids and do our best for kids and their parents.
I can jump in with a little more detail on. Would that be helpful, Jamie, to just talk about a few things that are high profile?
Go for it, Patty.
We created in the 2019 legislature, we created a very loose kind of coalition of education groups, et cetera, that includes TASA, TASB, Raise Your Hand, et cetera, so that we had a coordinated approach to some bills that would really be helpful to districts. And we've done the same thing this year. We have a printed legislative sort of guidance. It's not specific bills, but out of that has come 25 bills that would really increase transparency and accountability, correct some problems. For example, some of those bills by Representative Canales come out of some of the problems that happened with IDEA, where there was no transparency on how they were spending funds. Some of them are from Representative Ana Maria Ramos, who would just require basic information to be posted on charter school websites, because sometimes you cannot find, for example, that a charter school is even an alternative accountability campus. Representative Goodwin and Representative Gonzalez have bills on creating equity in funding. I think Emily's going to talk about Representative Hinojosa's bills on discipline, which are extremely important, because until charters take all students and accept all students, we're not ever going to have equity. That is the one equity bill. That is an equity bill. Charters can, and she'll talk about what that means in terms of, particularly in terms of equity in kids of color and special ed. Whether we are, because of what Thomas said, because of the chairman, we don't know if we will even get hearings on these bills. We don't know. I want to mention, however, the charter schools have a very, very robust bills that they're supporting, and two of them are really important because charters have gotten very concerned about what happens at a local level. Although almost every charter that wants to build a campus is approved at the city level, sometimes there are reasons that a particular location doesn't work. It may be a health and safety issue, et cetera. So charter schools have two bills that are incredibly important, and they're up right now and they're moving forward, which would limit local authority to just do basic zoning on charter schools. One of them is scheduled for calendars. I will update MASMA just so that you all can get that information out, because the actions superintendents, if you know your state reps, are really important. And these are very bipartisan. They're supported by a very bipartisan group of legislators. So it is not a Democratic or Republican. These bills are not Democratic or Republican. There are many supporters from both parties of these bills, and there are many opponents from both parties on these bills. So that's really important. I'd like to talk at some point about charter expansion and how they expand, because that is also a really important part of the legislative agenda.
Tremendous. Emily, it sounds like she set you up. We know that your background is really exploring discipline issues, especially. Go for it, Emily.
Thanks. Yeah, so I am not an expert. I am a parent who's trying to figure out how to navigate all of this. And so I hope that will be an encouragement to other parents. And the couple of bills that Patty mentioned are by local Austin Representative Gina Hinojosa, and they're HB 97 and HB 108. And these are both bills that would, as Thomas mentioned earlier, help to level the playing field between charter schools and true publics. And the one bill would include discipline history as a category that charters would no longer be allowed to discriminate against, prospective students. So right now, charters are able to, as has been mentioned a couple different times, sort of choose their students in a way that true public schools cannot. And in terms of equity and a level playing field, there's just no way to have that. You can't have a competition if the two different teams are playing by different rules. So even if we believe in competition in markets, we really need to level these playing fields and ask charters to exist within the same system as true publics exist. And then the second bill would sort of, again, level the playing field so that charters have to abide by the same pieces of the Texas Education Code regarding suspensions and codes of conduct, how those are available, what they talk about, what they have to notify parents of, and sort of how they have to go through these steps of discipline And again, we know that disciplinary practices as they currently exist in Chapter 37 of the Texas Education Code often have really horribly disparate impacts on students of color, our Black students and Latinx students, as well as students who are receiving special education services. And these are all things that charters sort of expand on those disparities by simply just not serving those students at all. And so I think neither of these bills, neither of them have been scheduled for a hearing yet. As Patty said, we don't know what happens with bills like this because of the sort of pro-charter attitude of the legislature, but I think they're really important to keep calling folks on and asking to support this type of leveling of the playing field.
Tremendous. Thank you, Emily. And Vincent, you represent MASBA to the Texas Legislative Education Equity Caucus, Coalition, excuse me. As part of their meetings, you know, as you all explore some of the legislation, anything that strikes you about proposed bills?
No, I think Patty and Emily covered it. I think that and even what Thomas had mentioned earlier, I mean, I think that what charter schools are trying to do every session is try to find a different way to get their hands in our pockets, in our wallets, or to be able to have these specific freedoms to be able to get away with, you know, certain loopholes. And that could be through zoning, it could be through admissions policies, it could be through saying that they are civil rights movement, or they demand their own charter equity, you know, because they are serving, you know, Black and brown kids in ways that we're not. So I think that they're, you know, you see things like what comes out of that is like the transformation zone or 1882, and it's all different ways of like trying to get into the public schoolhouse. Like I knocked on the front door, and so now they recognize me, so I'm gonna have to go through the window on the side, and it's all just different kinds of ways that, you know, proposed legislation. And I think Patty, Emily, and Thomas did a great job of laying out the characters, you know, the cast of characters, and what the different, you know, like ways that they're trying to get in look like.
Tremendous. Thank you. Patty?
I'd like to give my favorite example of what's included in a charter student code of conduct. So as Emily said, Representative Hinojosa's bill would require charters to follow Chapter 37, basically, in terms of how you can expel a student. So my favorite one is in 2015, actually Representative Alma Allen called out a particular charter school at a House Public Ed hearing. And in the student, what a charter can do, they can include any behavior in their student code of conduct for which a student can be expelled. They even can have a parent code of conduct, and if the parents don't comply, the student can be expelled. And my favorite one in this particular charter school, which was KIPP, actually changed it after that, because they were called out publicly. But my favorite one was a student can be expelled if they do not show up every day to school every day prepared to learn. And so you understand that that is so subjective. It is, and that's when I talk about a system of exclusion. The system works against not only admitting and enrolling, but also then retaining students. So there's a front-end exclusion and also exclusion if the kids slip through and around the campus. And that's really important to understand, because that is the key equity issue. And there's all kinds of research about children of color and children with special needs have a disproportionate percentage of disciplinary issues.
And it's grounded in school choice, right? So it's, you know, they're like, they need a choice. But what we see is that what the charters have manipulated that phrase basically under, you know, in the shadows by saying those charter schools are choosing which kids they're going to teach, which kids they're going to accept. And so that's what school choice kind of looks like in that charter world, especially the chains.
Superintendent Michael Cardona of the San Marcos CISD is asking a question. I'd like to make it a two-part question for our panel. Superintendent Cardona asks, why do you believe some public school districts are embracing charters? And as a part of part B to that question, I'd like to ask, why is it that you believe, what are some of the real reasons that legislators might be pushing a pro-charter agenda as well? How's that for a question? Why would publicly run public school districts be partnering with charter schools in favor of this? And why would legislators as well be part of that? Who would like to jump in? Emily, I saw you maybe giving a sign that you'd like to jump in.
Again, not an expert, but I will just say follow the money. I think one of the things that strikes me as I look and watch AISD function is that we are starving our true public education for funds. We are absolutely starving them for funds. And so I think there's a little bit of just looking for help. And I don't think we need to look outside of true public education for that help in the name of charters. I think we could just choose to fund our true public education system in an effective and appropriate manner. So that was my first thought, was just to, follow the money. And right now, because legislators are supportive, and I'll let Patty and Thomas and Vincent speak more about that, a lot of the money is flowing towards charter schools instead of towards our true publics. And that really, it sort of creates a position where I think true publics feel like they need to outsource some of the education. And so that's just my opinion.
Well, just to thank you, Emily, and just to build on that, as many superintendents know, because you're probably facing this in your own district, the House Bill or Senate Bill 1882 allows the district to create an in-district charter. It can be or bring an open enrollment charter in, or create an in-district charter with a nonprofit or a university. And so there's been some pushback in some districts because it normalizes charter schools. But of course, the carrot to Superintendent Cardona's question, the carrot about 1882 schools is that that school, if it's an 1882 school, gets the same funding that a charter gets in that district. And so I'm so glad I did not plant that question, Superintendent Cardona, but it's a great question, because we have to remember that on average, charter schools get $1,150 more per student in M&O. So if you look at, that's the average. And in some districts, like in Socorro, it's $2,200 more per student. So a charter student walks out of Socorro into a charter school, and that student gets $2,200 more in M&O dollars. In Austin, it's $1,182, for example, but the average is $1,150. And so that is, for districts, that is a huge, in some ways, it is a way to increase funding for some of the schools in their district. So that's the carrot on 1882. What was the second question? I forgot. One was why districts might be partnering with charter schools.
And also legislators, Patty. Why would legislators be so pro-charter?
I would like for Thomas to weigh in on this as well. And I think that's there are a lot of reasons. A lot of legislators do not know some of the things we're talking about today, and it's kind of on us. Representative Hinojosa always reminds me on things. We don't know those things. So it's only been in the last really 3 to 4 years that we have had a really focused, coordinated effort to really begin to answer a lot of what I call charter narratives. And we have continued to really shed light and transparency on those. Do charters outperform districts? Charters say yes, no. Charters get more money. Yes, we've shown that. If a charter school moves into a neighborhood, all the schools improve. No. We've begun to really chip away at those narratives, but we have a big job to do. And I think that the more we can partner with school districts, and that's why I think what you're doing here today, we need to get that information out more to superintendents, to school board members, to PTAs, et cetera, so that we really know. I had a parent come up to me recently and said, she's very involved, and she said, Patty, you won't believe this. Charter school teachers do not have to be certified. Of course, I knew that, but my point is that this is a very involved parent, and she had just found that out and was fairly stunned by it. Parents don't know that. And so there's a lot of information that I think we have a job. Also, there are literally tens of millions of dollars going in to support charter organizations and narratives. And that that kind of money involves philanthropists and foundations really makes a huge difference in terms of trying to really provide public education supporters with information. The ask that we have is that we have more people and we have really well-informed people, and we really need just our better collaboration and coordination. But I think Thomas could probably shed some light on that as well.
Well, if you truly believe in local control, which I do, and always have, I think you've got to allow for that. Some superintendents will view a partnership with a charter as what's best for their kids. I think Spring Branch ISD in West Houston was one of the first to do it. And I think it also is a glimpse into what I talked about earlier, is that superintendent may have come to the realization that the best way to reach those kids is in a less regulated model with a charter partnership. And so if they can't do what the state will allow them to do because of the 3,000-page education code, if they partner with a charter operator and they can get it into a less regulated environment and still meet those kids where they are and what they need. I do think it's important to realize that with 5.5 million kids, there is not one right way to do it. And so just as that's true, parents will make a variety of choices for what's best for their kid, hopefully. And hopefully the parent is making an informed choice, which I think is somewhat of a challenge when it comes to choices parents make based on perception or campaign paraphernalia versus the facts. But I think the same can be said for 181 members of the legislature. They are citizen legislators. We have homeschool parents, private school parents, charter parents, ISD parents. But I think the biggest challenge that I find as an ISD advocate is too many people, whether it's parents, kids, teachers, or legislators, making decisions based on inaccurate information about ISDs, either globally or locally. And it's a challenge that will never go away. But I don't begrudge a local superintendent from having that partnership. Some of them are doing the 1882 partnerships to get out of that regulation. So I think some view the situation in their local area and will partner with a charter operator. Some do it at the pre-K kindergarten level. Some do it, elementary, middle school. Some do it for other certain student groups. It's not dissimilar from rural districts banding together and having one special education program for multiple districts so they can concentrate and do it better than having smaller programs in multiple ISDs. So again, local control, and the closer to that kid that decision is made by locally elected officials, it's always going to be better than decisions made in Austin.
Thank you both. Vincent, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, when it's about like, well, if we can't beat them, let's join them. And it's like, that just goes back to the competition, aspect in general. Like, do we really need to compete, or should we just try to meet the needs of each and every kid and not have to compete about it, And so the other part is that it's all kind of masked. There's a disguised narrative that people don't know about the realities, of, well, how are these charters operating, or how are ideas kids, 100% of them going to college, upon graduation, or how are they doing better than our schools, or why are parents leaving? And a lot of times it's like parents are leaving because they know that if they take their kid out of a public school and they send them to a charter, that charter is going to kick out the bad kids. And that's what they say, I want my kid to go to that school because they're going to kick out the bad kids. And so that's why it's public. They call it publicly funded private schools. And so, and what kicking out bad kids looks like, we get kids that come back from the charter and we ask them, like, what happened? And they say, well, I got my third strike. And they say 3 strikes and you're out, It's like, so that's what that looks like. And then the other way, in high school, you look at charter high school, you see how many kids they have in 9th grade and how that dwindles down to 12th grade. And it's like the 300 kids they had in 9th grade all of a sudden became, 75 kids in 12th grade. And those 75 kids just happen to all get accepted to college, and they're going to college. What happened to those 300 kids, or those 225 other kids? They got counseled out. That's what they say, counseled out. And so that looks like them telling the kid, you can either if you stay at our school, we will retain you. You will fail this grade. But if you go to a public school, if you transfer out and go to a public school, we'll promote you. And so that's what counseling out looks like. And these are the realities. And then with all of this narrative, that gets transferred, or the lack of those realities, and people not knowing that, just transfers over to like, well, these charter schools are doing a great job. You know, all their kids are going to college, they're getting all these families that are sending their kids to these schools, they're doing so much better. You know, and so then all of a sudden people think, oh, well, sounds like we could learn something from them. Yeah, you could learn how to be unethical, immoral, lie, you know, perpetuate fraud. So, you know, those are the choices that we don't, or that's the direction I'm not wanting, you know, to move in.
Thank you, Patty.
I'd like to call out Superintendent Cardona, though, also because they did a great job in the last approval of charter applications, and I won't go into the whole story, but they were very proactive and put out an incredible YouTube as a decision was being made, and it really had a huge influence. And I think that looking at districts, both school board members and superintendents being involved in the expansion process, applications and amendments, is extremely important. And I would even suggest that we all might want to send a YouTube out from his district, because it is really stunning. It's hearing from both the superintendent, parent, and it's very compelling, and it made a huge difference. That charter was rejected sort of overnight. So superintendents and board members make a huge difference, and we're seeing some really great, you know, participation.
Tremendous. With 10 minutes left, perhaps it's time for a lightning round. We have two questions that dwell on SB 1882 partnerships. I know here in the Austin ISD, we forged an SB 1882 partnership with United Way to serve pre-K kids. The one question from Brett Miller is, can you distinguish SB 1882 charter partners for innovation and the charter schools discussed so far today? What is your opinion on SB 1882 charters for innovation, and what do you expect the additional funding to continue long-term for partnering districts? And Tracy Fisher asks, doesn't collaborating with SB 1882 result in more authority by the commissioner versus the State Board of Education? Anyone able to tackle either or both?
I can give a little bit, and let me. So I think Thomas stated the carrot of 1882 is definitely there, and there have been some early childhood partnerships, like in Austin, et cetera, that have expanded the ability to serve more kids. So I mean, there's kind of a reason for that. They certainly were used initially because some districts faced the very first year, some districts faced closure under 1842. So one of the issues, though, that with 1882, to Tracy Fisher's point, is that TEA does have rules that govern 1882, and some of them changed in the last year, that did, in fact, provide some limits that were not really intended in the original law. We don't have time to get into some of those, which does give TEA certainly more ability to kind of craft what those look like. And in the end, TEA does approve the 1882 partnerships. So that's, we can get more into 1882. That could be a whole session unto itself, I think, because it's very complicated.
Thank you, Patty.
I don't confess to know all the ins and outs of 1882. I think there is a lot of rulemaking to be written on that topic, and a lot of unintended consequences to be either tied down or unraveled as that goes. I know Longview, Texas, either investigated it or did it, but it has regulatory effects, it has financial effects, local control effects. I think it's largely a response to ISDs trying to get out from under the thumb of the state and run their districts. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I think is certainly in the eye of the beholder, or the eye of the local taxpayer or the state legislator, for sure.
There's also fiscal impact, because it does cost the state more. So just to, I think everyone knows this, but charter schools are paid for entirely with state funds. So an 1882 school costs more than the student gets in a neighboring school that is just getting the district's entitlement funds. So there are also questions there of equity, but it also costs the state more money, and we don't necessarily get more money for 1882. So those are some of the long-term things that have to be looked at as well in terms of expanding those 1882 schools.
Trustee Armando Velasquez of the Lake Worth ISD is wondering whether there have been any legal challenges against the state for any of the inequities that have been created as a result of pro-charter legislation. Any of us on the call aware of any legal challenges to date?
There may have been. I'm not. I would have to trust the real live lawyers. I just play one on TV.
I would have to think about that, and actually I will, and I'm happy to have someone from Lake Worth on, because I'd like to talk briefly about expansion at some point. And Lake Worth is really getting, the Tarrant County districts are really getting hit with expansion, but I'd have to think about that. One of the things that is a great concern, however, is that the policies that are both in the statute with the discipline exclusion that exclude children with special needs or work against children with special needs. And that's a concern because, of course, that is federal law. Charters overall serve close to a third, 28% fewer children with special needs. But when you look at a charter school compared to nearby neighborhood schools, it's sometimes they're serving only a third, or the district schools are serving 300% more. I mean, it varies. So that is a real concern and a real issue, and I think even TEA is concerned about that.
Thank you, Patty. Two more questions left in our lightning round. Where can superintendents and trustees get the best information on the impact of charter schools on our publicly run public schools here in Texas? How's that for a question? Do you all have favorite organizations that you watch, websites, resources that we might recommend to our superintendents and trustees?
Well, I think that when it comes to the realities of what that looks like, the very specifics is the front office staff at our public schools, especially our public schools that serve Latinx students, because we see that charters go after our English language learners, or we're not bilingual emergent or multilingual emergent learners. Our Latinx students comprise the vast majority of who the charter chains go after. So what that looks like at our front office staff at our school, for the front office staff at our schools, and for our teachers who talk to the parents and the kids who leave our schools and a lot of times come back from charters, and front office staff who get the call that says from a charter school that says, hey, I need the discipline records for Juan, and it's like, okay, all right, well, we see how you operate, and so we don't have the data though, because we're not tracking that, and we need to be tracking that.
And groups like TASA and TASB and others have good resources for board members and superintendents, and I'm sure y'all do as well. They can have the TEA data that compares campus data. Now, admittedly, a lot of that accountability data is based on the A through F rating, which is based on a standardized bubble sheet. So it's limited in its usefulness per se, but it is an apples to apples comparison in some regard.
I'd like to throw one thing out, and I'd like to sort of turn that question around just a little bit, which is that, so I am going to get my expansion statement in really fast if I could. At the same time that the legislature is going on, which is an all hands on deck deal, it's really important to know that this is the period of time where charters are expanding. So we are now, the deadline for charter amendments, which are existing charters, can meet certain requirements and expand anywhere in Texas. There are 66 amendments to create new campuses were submitted as of last Friday. And if you all want, I do have the geographic list I can send to you to send out to superintendents. And then new charter applications not operating in Texas, that is going on right now too. And what's critical is that districts have an opportunity to submit what's called a statement of impact form, in which you actually tell TEA, here's what the impact will be on our district. And it's a good exercise because districts, sometimes if you do what we call the expanded statement of impact, you don't just check the little box on the form that you receive, but you actually look at fiscal impact, impact on programs, how much money revenue you're going to lose from this charter. It's pretty eye-opening. There are districts that have found out over a year or two, they're losing larger districts losing $100 million a year from existing charter schools. And so I would, TASA has put out a kind of a form that really guides districts called an expanded statement. I am happy to send you examples of what some districts have done. And the Tarrant County districts, Lake Forest included, has been a real leader on this because they've been to do these joint statement of impact. So it's important for a district to know what the impact of the charter expansions will be on their district.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Patty. We'll look forward to sharing that information, if you don't mind, in our e-blast to all our friends at MASBA. Time flies when you're having fun. Tracy Fisher of the Capel ISD Board of Trustees says, thank you for this rock star panel. I know that she speaks for all of us here. What about concluding words? As we conclude our time together today, what concluding words and or call to action might each of you offer? We'd love to hear each of your voices one last time with concluding words and or a call to action. Who'd like to jump in?
I think the biggest threat this session, one of the biggest threats, is to try to pull the State Board of Education out of the approval process for new charters. The Senate is trying to do it because they don't like the SBOE exerting their authority over the approval of new campuses. It is already meeting resistance, but to take that decision away from elected officials and give it to one appointed commissioner appointed by a governor is not good policy, regardless of who the governor is, regardless of who the commissioner is. So if there's one thing that is probably the biggest threat in terms of oversight over charter approvals, it's that issue right there. So I would say contact your senator and representative and say elected officials represent their districts better than appointed people by a governor.
Thank you, Thomas.
I'd say it's important to understand and remember that legislators do not know where you are unless they hear from you. And charter school issues are bipartisan. You know, they're not Democratic, Republican issues, pro or con. It's really important. And it can make a difference. I have seen legislators that support public schools, but not high on their priority. 10 calls from 10 parents or board members turns them around because they understand their constituents care about these issues. So I would say the power of board members is really, should not be underestimated, but they have to hear from you on things like this. The SBOE veto is incredibly important.
Thank you, Patty.
I would just encourage everyone listening to engage and involve the parents in your schools. Parents are a huge force. We are on the front lines with our kids in the schools. Listen to your teachers, listen to the staff, the people who work for you. If you're a superintendent, if you're a school board member, those are the experts, the students and the parents and the teachers. And so if that's not your first, when you're asking, how do I find out what's happening? If those aren't the first three groups you're going to, then maybe you need to shift your thinking a little bit about who you're serving. So I would just encourage you all to do that hard work. It's really important. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Vincent?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everyone. And Emily, to extend on that, also engage the families that aren't in our schools, that are in our charter schools, you know, and just have them ask questions and, you know, have them, you know, tell you why they left. And a lot of times I think our political landscape is we tend to just talk within our own comfort circles. And so we need to, you know, engage that those that make us uncomfortable or, you know, where we find discomfort. And then they're going to tell you they had most likely they had a problem with customer service at their public school, or they didn't have a strong connection with their kid's teacher. Those are the two main things we hear. And it's like, okay, well, let's take that information and let's take it to our public schools and figure out what we can do.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you all. What a rock star panel. We're going to invite our sponsor, John, to come back on the screen while all of us are here, simply to share some final words and that final invite again about the webinar that's coming up, John. So greatly appreciate you and all our friends at Aetna. Remind us of that invitation and any last words from you as well. Would love to hear your voice.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for allowing us to attend. Yeah, just real quickly, my call to action would be please join us on the 8th. You'll see the invite come out shortly, be around lunchtime, and we'll talk through all things vaccine, especially vaccine hesitancy, which is such a challenge in our communities. Thank you again for allowing us to attend.
Awesome. Thank you, John, to you and all our friends at Aetna. Appreciate you, and we'll look forward to spreading word of that opportunity on April the 8th. One last time, 3 more days left to apply for MASBA scholarships. You'll find that application for graduating seniors at masbatx.org/scholarships. Y'all are tremendous. We so greatly appreciate your time today, and we look forward to learning more together. Patty, thank you for helping us to spread word. We'll look forward to including that in our next e-blast. You and Edna Butts of the Austin ISD who joined us today. You were so tremendous in sharing with us at our MASBA conference last year about the dual public education system that we set up here in Austin. So let's continue the conversation. Y'all have been absolutely tremendous, and we so greatly appreciate y'all. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Vincent and Jamie.